to the Private Property Farming Podcast. My name is Mbali Nwoko, and thank you for joining us. Please feel free to ask any questions on whichever platform you're watching this podcast. And today I'm riding solo just to tackle the topic of the highs and lows of farming as a big investment. And firstly, I want to start off by saying that farming is an investment at whichever scale that you decide to be producing on. And what I mean by that is you could be farming on 10 hectares, 100 hectares, 1,000 hectares. Either of those operations require some form of infrastructure, mechanization, tools and equipment to assist you in your production. And therefore, I strongly consider you to make careful planning and consideration prior to you buying any of those tools or equipment or mechanization or building any infrastructure on your farm. And the best way to seek that advice is going to speak to experts, irrigation experts, borehole experts, whatever infrastructure you're putting onto your farm. Please speak to people who are experts in this particular thing or infrastructure that you want to put on. If you want to buy a tractor, speak to tractor salesmen that could assist you in terms of the right tractor to buy that will suit your operations, because in the long run, the last thing that you want to do is be stuck with a piece of equipment maybe that could only service you for 2 or 3 years. And you know, when you're thinking about growing a business, that equipment may no longer be feasible into your operations. So in business, there's this term that we call risk management planning and also forecasting for growth. So prior to any form of investment at whichever level your business or your farm is at, definitely seek the advice of a professional, and most importantly, seek out the advice of farmers, because it's all about the commodity that you're farming. You want to start a product that you could sell at the end of the day. And so whether you're farming, growing cattle, growing crops, you definitely need to seek the advice of farmers that have walked the path before you, because even in your production, whether you're buying cattle or livestock for your operation, there is a specific decision-making process that needs to happen in terms of what is the right cattle or breed for your farming operation specific to the area that you're in. Similarly with the crops, also you need to speak to experts to tell you what is the right varieties that you need to farm on your specific farm or land that will suit your soil type, the weather conditions, etc. All of these things are investments that is required and mandatory for your farm to succeed. And so to answer the questions of is this a high or a low, I honestly feel that it's all situational, you know, because today you could be starting a new farm, you're all excited in terms of this investment that you're starting, and with hopes and prospects to grow it into a fully fledged and functional business that will create employment, impact a community positively. That is all great. It's things that will obviously motivate you to really push this farming forward. But I think what you need to think of is that as much as you're starting something new, is this what you really want? So what I'm trying to get to is that the investment part of it is not only from a monetary perspective, but the investment part could also be based on what are your personal goals? Why are you starting to farm? Why do you want to farm? What about farming is attractive to you? Because in the future, that's where you'll decide if this was a high or a low for me. And just to give you an example of what I mean is that many individuals say they want to start farming because it's their passion. It's something that they've wanted to do for donkey years, or it's something that they enjoy. They grow their own food in their backyard garden, and therefore they want to start farming. And so a lot of individuals start investing in an actual farm, maybe buying a plot or an operational farm, or just starting a farm from scratch. And then further along the years, or in a couple of months down the line, they really decide that this is not for them. It's not what they thought it was. Yes, it's different to growing food in your own backyard, but when you're starting to produce your own food from a commercial perspective, when you start to produce food from commercial perspective and selling it to clients and having employees, that is a lot of responsibility. And at the end of the day, it is a business. And therefore you need to ask yourself, was this a high? Was this a low? Was this investment good for me or not? And so I think it's not really the be all and ends all to be motivated by money. You know, wanting to maybe follow your passion, but also make money at the end of the day. It's always going back to your why. Why are you starting something? Is this going to bring you fulfillment? I know with my journey, for my farming journey, um, the reason why I started is because I wanted to make a greater impact. I wanted to impact positively to my people, people that I employ, the community that I serve in and around my farm, and most importantly, find a sense of purpose for myself. So it's an interpersonal thing. And therefore, when I look at my farming journey, I strongly believe that my journey or the investment that I've made into farming, not only from a monetary perspective, but from an interpersonal perspective, was a definite positive, was a definite high for me. And so I think it's always going back to your why. Why is it that you're starting things? Furthermore, from a monetary perspective, you might also think that if you're starting a new farm and you're seeing this new farm as a positive or a high, it's a journey, it's a new beginning for you. In the long run, it might be a low simply because of the situation you find yourself in. And what I mean by that is, you might buy a farm that's 1,000 hectares. You might cultivate maize in that and make good profits over the years. And then there comes a point in time when business, you get a decline. And typically with farming, because everything is so expensive each and every year, operational costs become expensive, mechanization becomes expensive, input costs become expensive. And you find that over the years, as you grow, or stay longer in the industry, a lot of the things are starting to become expensive. And then you decide, instead of plowing and cultivating 1,000 hectares onto this farm, rather let me cut down to 500 hectares. And then you find that the other 500 hectares is left dormant on your farm. And some farmers have found themselves in a situation where, because they haven't been farming on that 500 hectares for many years, you start to see a change in the surroundings around you. People start putting informal infrastructure on your land. And this is where some farmers find themselves in a situation of land grabs, unfortunately enough. And when you look at that situation, the intention when you started was, this is a great investment. It's a positive for me. I'm creating jobs. I'm impacting a community that's very close to me and surrounding my farm, and therefore I'm growing a small economy in and around my farm. But now, fast forward to a couple of years, when you're not producing on other parts of your farm, you find that you find yourself in a situation where there's land grabs, and you think, wow, this was a bad decision. I shouldn't have started farming. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have bought 1,000 hectares, So I think you have to look at this side of the coin in two ways, in terms of why did you start something. And sometimes to label something as a negative or a low is purely based on a situation, that you cannot forecast, that you cannot predict as well. And so those situations, extreme as land grabs, are quite unfortunate. But from a monetary point of view, from an infrastructure, from buying tools and equipment for your farm, I think prior to making those investments, because farming is quite expensive. And the reason why it is expensive is because a lot of the input costs that we get as farmers are imported products and materials. And therefore, with the rand-dollar exchange, it does make farming quite expensive. And there's a lot of farmers that are very resourceful, that try to do an innovative and DIY approach to their farms, to take their farms to the next level without having to spend so much money. And so I think this is the reason why I strongly believe that prior to you making any form of investments, specifically from a monetary perspective, definitely seek the professional advice of experts in the industries, those that have walked the journey before you, so that you don't end up buying the wrong things or buying a land in the wrong community. Maybe you think this is a farming community, but you didn't, speak to the local council or chief in the area, or the property agent, to find out what in the next couple of years is going to happen in this community. Is this area going to be changed into a residential area? Is there a mall going to be built? Is there a mine going to be built in this area? So before buying that land, make sure that you have all the facts about what could potentially impact or advance your farming operations. Similarly enough, if you think you've got money to buy your own land, there's so many ways to getting into farming. You could lease certain land on a farmer's, on an already existing farm, maybe like going back to that 1,000-hectare example, you might meet a farmer who's has access to 1,000 hectares, but is only producing on 500. And if the other 500 is left dormant, you can approach them to rent that land for a season, at the start of a crop season to the end, instead of having to go put all that investment into buying a land, and then you must seek additional funds to put up the infrastructure. Again, you could also find lease land. So instead of buying land outright, which is an example that we've spoken about on many other platforms many times, even on this farming podcast, is that you have the option to rent instead of buying a land outright, and see if this is really the choice for you. And so many people also would look at the options of, let me rather rent land from the government instead of using the money that I have to buy this land. I should rather put the resources and this capital into the infrastructure. And so if you're fortunate enough and have are exposed to such an opportunities, I think definitely explore what is available to you and look at the resources that you have available to you and take advantage of that. An additional thing is that from a mechanization perspective, find out is that if you're buying 1,000 hectares of land or 500 hectares or 10 hectares of land or leasing on 10 hectares, and you know that you need equipment and machinery, is it a wise decision to spend 500,000 into a brand new tractor? How often are you using that tractor? At what seasons are you using the tractor? Is the tractor just going to cultivate and plow the land? Or is it going to work every single day, bringing crops out of the field into the pack house? So these are the decisions that you need to make. And so when you're going to speak to the sales individuals, make them understand your operations entirely so that they can give you the right tractor. Again, there's so many innovative apps like the Axle app now, which is a division of Agri that it's almost an Uber for tractors. So instead of investing in a tractor, and if you know that you're not going to be using the tractor every single day, rather rent out a tractor, speak to a neighbor that has a tractor and see if you could use that tractor for a specific period of time or specific hours, and he or she can rent that tractor to you for that specified time instead of going out and investing in the tractor. Similarly, the same applies to a pack house. If you're going to be producing crops and harvesting the same day and sending it out through to your client on the same day, maybe you might not need a pack house, maybe you might not need a cold room, and there might be that option where your clients actually prefer to come take the produce at your farm, simply because maybe they've got other farmers that also supply to them. And so from a logistics point of view, it just makes it better for the client to come to your farm instead of you taking a crop to the client. And therefore, things like a pack house might not be needed. But all of this is situational and it's all dependent on your operation. So from an investment point of view, I definitely would say that have careful planning and decision-making that must go behind prior to making any formal investment. Seek the advice of expert professionals, and please feel free to comment, because I'm willing to engage with you guys and any questions that you have, and where certain things you might find confusing. But I definitely would say that when you want to go into farming and investing in your infrastructure and your operations, definitely look at ways in which you could save money, because that money and that capital initially that you have could also go to some better resources that could really grow your farming business in the long run. So, and then again, from a standpoint that is not really monetary, to decide whether this was a positive or a good or bad investment that I've made, it also does come from something that doesn't really involve money. It's about, why did you go into farming? Why is it that you're doing what you're doing? And so, yeah, I think that's like my advice that I could give to you specifically on farming. Is it a good investment or not? And I think from a holistic point of view, it's also, people want to go into farming because they want to be part of a community as well, and I think ensure food security. So obviously, when you look at that from a holistic point of view, that is a positive, irrespective of the challenges that you experience on a daily basis, the money that you spend, the problems that you are faced with and have to overcome and bring really good and innovative solutions to it. In the long term, if you understand your why and you think, and you're saying that at the end of the day, as much as no matter how difficult this farming is, or this keeping this business or this farming operation alive, at the end of the day, I'm contributing towards something bigger than me. I'm playing in an industry where not many individuals are in, and at the end of the day, I'm growing food. I'm feeding a nation, as we always say. So, you know, there's always highs. That's a high. That's a positive to look at it. So I think just to tackle this question, it's really, it's situational. Not all the investment is based on a monetary perspective, but also could be from an interpersonal perspective. But where infrastructure, equipment, mechanization is involved, seeds, seedlings, what breeds to buy, what fruit trees to invest in, that definitely seek advice of a professional and an expert prior to making any purchases or signing any agreements. Yeah, and I think you'll be better off in the long run. So definitely do your strategic planning. And I hope that I've given some sort of sense and understanding towards this topic. And yeah, looking forward to our conversation on Thursday, same time, 1 o'clock. You could catch us, the Farming Podcast, on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as YouTube, whichever platforms you decide to watch this podcast. And I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you so much for joining me. See you on Thursday.